There's been a huge diplomatic showdown, of course, between India and Canada over the last fortnight or so. It began with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau making public allegations from the floor of the Canadian Parliament that Indian agents were involved in the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Now, the Indian government has rejected these claims as absurd. It has said that if there is anything specific by way of evidence that the Canadian authorities are willing to share, then India is willing to cooperate in that probe. Now, it's been 2 weeks. We have not seen any evidence that's been shared either in the public domain or privately with Indian officials. Meanwhile, Canada has moved out about 40 odd of its diplomatic staff, primarily from its missions outside New Delhi, Bangalore, Chandigarh, and of course the one in Mumbai. They have been moved out of India to places like Singapore and Kuala Lumpur for reasons of parity, as was demanded by India when this controversy began. Now, what is the way out of what is easily the lowest point in diplomatic ties between Ottawa and New Delhi? Joining me now is a renowned international journalist, columnist, and of course the host of Fareed Zakaria GPS on CNN. Fareed Zakaria, welcome to CNN News 18. Let me start off by asking you, it's been 2 weeks now since Justin Trudeau made those public allegations, stood up in the Canadian Parliament and said that there were credible allegations that Indian agents were linked to the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. But in these last 2 weeks, we haven't seen any evidence either in public or in private. First things, why do you think he did what he did, going public with these allegations? And do you believe that if he had the proof, he would have shared that either publicly or privately with his Indian counterparts by now?
It's a very good question, Zaka. My own view is that Trudeau was reluctant to do this and did it reluctantly, knowing it would cause a firestorm, which of course it has caused. But my sense is that the Canadian, investigative intelligence system works fairly independently, and it presented him with what it saw as a compelling case. And I believe there was some efforts to get the Indians to cooperate, and they didn't go anywhere. And at that point, he decided, he had to go public with it, because my guess is that there will probably be some kind of judicial process at some point. Maybe there's likely. I'm guessing there will be an arrest. If there's an arrest, there will have to be a trial. So, in order to kind of forestall any kind of a bombshell coming out that way, my sense is Trudeau did what he did. I think it was a mistake, because when you are, I understand that you cannot reveal intelligence sources, but the U.S. has gone through this many times, most famously with the Iraq War. If you are not able to reveal intelligence, you're not going to be able to convince other people, and you're not going to be able to convince people. That nobody has that level of trust anymore in government. And so the Trudeau government should have decided, look, if we have this proof and it would reveal sources and methods of intelligence for us to publicly show it, then we can't go public on the charge. But they did, and as I said, my sense is they were motivated by this sense that this is going to maybe go public anyway, because there will be an arrest, there will be a trial. But they've ended up in a situation which I'm pretty sure, having spoken to some people in the Canadian government, they regret. That Canada does not want to have bad relations with India, but here we are.
But the response from the Indian side, and it's been ballistic, if I can use that word, because India has come straight up, denied the allegations. It's also halted any visas for Canadians who wish to travel to India. And today we have news that about 40 odd Canadian diplomats have already been moved out, as was demanded by India on day one when these allegations were made, that there should be parity. How does one come out of this?
Well, it's a very good question. And just to be clear, the charge is explosive. And so the Indians, I think, are responding, in a kind of similarly vigorous way, because at the end of the day, were the charges to be true, it really is outside of the norms of anything that I know that India has done. It's very rare for a democracy to operate like that. You would normally make the case to the Canadian government, ask for extradition, ask them to place the person under house arrest. Some version of that process, which, if you remember, happened with the Huawei case in Canada. So it's an explosive charge. The Indians have, as you say, completely denied it. Um, I think there has to be a way, because these are two countries whose long-term interests are entirely aligned. Um, it would be a mistake in terms of foreign policy on both sides to not recognize that there is a greater strategic kind of vision to keep in mind, which is that India benefits a lot from good relations with Canada. Canada benefits a lot with good relations with India. So I would hope that there could begin at some point um, a quiet dialogue, probably with Jaishankar and his counterpart in Canada, about ways in which you can slowly take the temperature down. Find a way to for each side to satisfy the other. Make clear that nothing like this. The Indian government would never do anything like this. You can't. Maybe you can't. You can't. You'll have to agree to disagree on this one case, but you can come up with rules of the road for future situations like this. Because, as you know, the issue of Sikhs, who the Canadians see as activists, the Indians see as terrorists, it's not going away. There are more of these people. But one would hope that both sides would see the larger strategic interest in cooperating.
I'm also curious to know your thoughts on the U.S. government's response to this. And now we know from reporting in the U.S. press that the initial intel was shared by the U.S. as part of the Five Eyes alliance. But the response from the U.S. and other members of the Five Eyes, the U.K. has responded, Australia has. It's been very, what they call, muted. Yes, wanting India to cooperate with Canada, but at the same time, none of these countries have called out or anywhere close to condemned India for these allegations. But I'm just curious to know, if the temperatures are going to be this high for, let's say, the next few weeks, do you foresee Biden administration officials sort of stepping in quietly, and what may they possibly do to try and quieten things a bit?
Yeah, that's a very good point, Zach. I think that first, the Americans do believe that there is substantial evidence that there was some connection between the Indian government and this killing. I don't know if they think that it's just positive or whether they think it's conclusive. But I know that there were, and as you say, some of the intelligence came from the U.S. I think that the reason they don't want to make a big deal out of it, as we're all aware, is the U.S. has made a strategic decision over the last three administrations to have a much closer relationship with India, at a full spectrum relationship that involves defense, foreign policy, economics, technology, and they don't want this uh, to screw things up. Now, the problem will be that there is likely to be, as I keep saying, this trial. If there is an arrest and a trial, this problem does not go away. If there isn't, and that in that situation, I think your suggestion, it seems quite plausible that the Americans will try in some way to intermediate or to quietly broker a rapprochement between Canada and India, but not if this kind of takes on the trial takes on a life of its own. And the complication here is that that could happen without Justin Trudeau doing anything, because the Canadian system, both of their version of the FBI and their courts are very independent, and they're not going to wait for government approval, and they're certainly not going to accept the Justin Trudeau telling them to shut this down and bury it. So that seems to me the problem. This has taken on a kind of quasi-judicial turn where it may have a life of its own, and one has to hope in some way that the case fizzles out.
One of the concerns Indian officials, when they speak privately, they say is Canada, and I think Jaishankar said this when he was in the US just a few days ago, that the problem is this whole permissive environment for elements that they believe are, secessionists, separatists, this whole idea of a Khalistan. Time and time again, Indian officials say, there is no resonance for Khalistan in Punjab. It's only in the diaspora, and even in the diaspora, it's a very tiny minority. Do you see action being taken? And by the way, it's not just Canada. I mean, the concern that India has when it comes to these quote-unquote Khalistani elements is they're there in the US, they're there in the UK, in some parts of Australia as well. But seemingly in those jurisdictions, in those countries, there has been some visible action. In Canada, nothing so far.
Yeah, look, it's a difficult problem because, as the Indian government themselves admits, this is a tiny minority of a minority of a minority. You're talking about, handfuls of people who are actually advocating Khalistani independence, the secession, all that kind of thing. So the problem is, what is the nature of that activity? If people are making that case, then that is activism, and it's protected, but not just in the U.S. and Canada and Australia, but depending on exactly how it was done, it would even be some part of it would be protected in India. If it is actions that are in some way particularly urging any kind of armed rebellion, armed uprising, then you can make the case that they should crack down. And I think that's the problem. The Canadians say that they're dealing with this largely a free speech issue. The Indians say no, there's more, there's incitement to violence. I think it's very unfortunate that this is happening because the truth is the Khalistan movement is dead. I remember it vividly. I remember obviously the Operation Blue Star, the assassination of Indira Gandhi, and then the riots after that, which were one of the most sad spectacles. And I think one of India's great strengths was to recover from all that. I mean, think about this: Manmohan Singh's brother-in-law was killed in those anti-Sikh riots that took place after Indira Gandhi's death. And that man's, the brother-in-law then becomes the prime minister. So
Yeah.
you had the ability for the country to heal from all of this. And now my fear is India is going to go back into that. And I hope that doesn't start casting suspicion on ordinary Sikhs or ordinary Punjabis who have no interest in this. That's the danger of all this. You're playing with fire.
I want to come to a couple of domestic questions, domestic in the U.S. We've seen these pretty, spectacular scenes this past week of the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, being voted out by some members of his own party, sort of engineering this coup against him. And now there's already speculation about former President Donald Trump possibly being some kind of an interim speaker. He's also said he wouldn't mind the job if it was just an interim arrangement. How realistic is that possibility? And if that were to happen, what may the next few weeks and months look like?
It's highly unlikely, but with Trump involved, you don't want to say never do anything because the whole thing is a kind of circus, and anything could happen. What it really shows you is that the Republican Party is having a nervous breakdown, and that this process is having huge and deleterious effects on India. Just to remind people, Kevin McCarthy has a 4-vote majority, which is a very slim majority. It's very hard to govern with that. Nancy Pelosi had a 4-vote majority and was able to pass massive amounts of legislation, even on a bipartisan basis in some cases. So this is not a problem with the American system. This is a problem that you have one party that is in free fall because you have within it a group of people who really kind of want to burn the house down, who are anti-establishment, multiplied by 1,000. Now, how you handle that is going to be very challenging because The next guy is going to face exactly the same problems Kevin McCarthy did. I don't think Trump will actually do it because Trump doesn't actually like government. He likes campaigning. If you become the Speaker of the House, now you're responsible for bills and you've got to actually get legislation through. And you've got to, for Trump, Trump is a great talker. And being on the campaign trail is what he loves. That's why he is so irritated by all these trials because they're keeping him out of the campaign trail. So I would suspect that he won't do it, which means that they will have to find somebody because right now you have a very strange situation where the interim speaker cannot do very much. You can't bring, for example, a bill to the floor.
Yeah.
And how do you get the budget passed? How do you get all the priorities of the government passed? It's a truly unprecedented. We've never been in this situation before.
And one of those priorities, and this is my final question, is about the war in Ukraine. The next speaker, whoever he or she may be, will have influence on the trajectory of funding, U.S. funding to Ukraine for continuance of this war. So it does have very real world consequences. But I'm also curious to know from you what your assessment of is where the war stands right now, because it seems like the Ukrainian counteroffensive hasn't had the kind of desired impact. And at this stage, it seems very unlikely that Ukraine may be able to regain all the territory it's lost since this war began. So where does it go from here?
Well, you put it exactly right. The counteroffensive has not gone as well as expected, largely because the Russians built very strong defensive lines. They've essentially created three lines of defense. First, landmines. Second, very deep concrete trenches. And third, artillery, tanks, and armored vehicles. So in order to actually get back the territory, you have to go through all three, which is very hard, very costly in lives and ammunition. So I suspect the Ukrainians will do a little better in the next few months. But I think that your broader point is accurate, that we are approaching some kind of a stalemate. Now, the Ukrainians do need to be able to free up some of the territory or recapture some of the territory in the south because they need Odessa. The key for Ukraine is they have to have the ability to export their grain from Odessa. You cannot export from the land. Land export is 10 times as expensive as export by water. So they have to turn Odessa back into a functioning port, which means they need some of the land in the south. Once that happens, and I don't know if it will, but I hope it does for Ukraine's sake. Then I think you approach a situation where you have to start wondering, is it worth beginning a diplomatic process? So far, the problem has been the Russians. Putin does not want to negotiate. Putin's strategy seems to be to try to hold out, hold firm. Russia is a big country. It's 15 times the economy of Ukraine. And to hold out, hold firm until the elections of 2024, when he thinks, I think largely correctly, that there's about a 50-50 chance that Donald Trump gets elected.
Yep.
And in that situation, he believes Trump will sell out the Ukrainians, make a deal with Putin. And that's the Russian strategy. Hold out till January 2025. In that situation, I can't see negotiations going anywhere seriously. So I think we're in for another 18 months of, broadly speaking, stalemate.
All right. Fareed Zakaria, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much for joining us here on CNN News 18.
My pleasure.
All right.